Well, hello, everyone, and welcome. This is a little bit of a podcast, a little bit of a different thing here on the Pinnacle channel. We're going to be breaking down the different RMR groups. My name is Brandon, aka B-Dog. I've got some wonderful guests with me today. I've got the wonderful casters of Hawker, Lucy, Luce, and Yumi ready to talk you through the action. Before we kind of dive into the teams, how are you guys doing? Is everyone all right?
Yeah, I'm doing great. I'm going to speak for the group, apparently.
Yeah,
I'm doing great. I hope the other guys are doing well, too, because we got Counter-Strike coming up, and that's always fun.
Yeah, we're not going to fight for the microphone, surely. So it's just like, we left it, and you can take it. You did speak for the group. I am also good, in fact.
All right.
I'm
Lucy.
good too.
Yeah.
Just to
Nice.
very, very excited.
You know it. We're all here. Brilliant.
We're all here. We're all
Amazing.
good. Yes.
All right, Yumi, you are going to speak for the group because look, we're going to talk teams. I'm going to single you out. We're looking at FaZe. Obviously, they are one of the teams to watch. Obviously, in really good hot form. Potentially could have a grand slam here with EPL season 16. Do they go 3-0? What's your hot take on that one?
Okay, first off, putting favorites in 3-0 always feels bad.
Risky,
because
right?
Yeah, especially because when you have so many opening rounds where it's just best of ones. So yeah, they are favorites to go 3-0, but it's just like it's one of those where you wouldn't be surprised if they dropped a map to maybe G2 or a Cloud9 in the group stage. I think they're favorites to go through. I don't think there's any question about that, though.
Yeah, I think that's a very reasonable take. I mean, always with the pick'ems, I think for me, I always try and make sure that the favourites aren't in my 3-0 box. I like to go for a little bit of a outside one of those. If we are speaking about 3-0, though, we're talking about teams that could potentially have one of these runs to make it through. I mean, Hawker, is there any team for you that could be a little bit of a curveball that could stand out, that could be on a 3-0, one of these miracle, almost like FA Cup-esque runs?
Oh, you're really throwing me in with a toughie. I mean,
Yeah.
I like where Fnatic are at right now, just because they're such a well-rounded roster. Like, they have no bad players on their team. Everyone is just really solid, and I feel like they're in a position where whenever I watch Fnatic play, they just look really solid. They'll just make like occasional weird mistakes, and maybe it's just adapting to Mezzi in-game leading. But if they can cut those out, I actually think this roster is just really solid across the board. Like, Roy is super underrated. Fasha is so skilled. This guy is going to be a problem in the future. So that whole roster, Fnatic, for me, like, outside of the obvious names here, they're probably the next name I look at and say, I'm pretty confident this team should make it through, actually.
I could agree on the Fnatic point, right? Because you also look at the group that they're in and the teams that are up against. And yeah, FaZe, as mentioned, is in there, and they're definitely a scary one. But it's not the most stacked at the top. Obviously, there's G2 as well, who are looking quite good at the moment. We've seen them in EPL playing really well. I'm sure we'll talk about them in a moment. But like NIP is going through a whole thing at the moment. Cloud9, a little bit up and down as well. And it's definitely a group where I think Fnatic could come through and maybe steal it away with a 3-0.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Sorry, go on.
Sorry, no, I think that this whole group actually just has a bunch of like sleeper team, because you could very well see Bad News Eagles through. You could see Fours. I think Eternal Fire actually have hit a bit of a groove. Weirdly, I actually think the teams that you would probably be high profile that people have going through, maybe even like an Astralis or maybe even a Spirit. Those ones are actually in trouble. I think this group has enough sort of hidden prowess with these newer roster moves that I'm worried for some of the ones we would have considered going through without any problems, maybe if we were looking back at Antwerp or around that time period. But now with the way that these rosters have developed, especially with like recent form after the player break, there's actually some contention for just getting into qualifying positions. Like, I could see Astralis narrowly missing out here.
Yeah, I think that's a really good just thing to kind of really echo my sentiment towards as well. I think a lot of teams here are very underrated, and lots of people just kind of look at the high profile names and don't really look at the journey as well. Before we kind of deep dive into that, though, I'm really interested in just tug in a little bit of this Fnatic thread, because I'm a little bit of a fanboy. I'm just going to be honest. Like, I do quite like watching them. I've been following them really predominantly ever since the Alex and Mezzi move came about, the transition to full European. It has taken time. We've now got some more missing pieces to that puzzle. I thought it was really interesting when kind of the roster division kind of tweeted and they said, oh, we're going to make these statement changes. We're going to bring Fnatic back to where it needs to be, because that August has got really such a legendary status, and they looked really good. I think coming out the gate in Pro League it did take them it didn't take them any time already to reach the RMRs. I think the biggest question mark, I think, on everyone's mind, and everyone feel free to jump in to this. I'm going to open the floor up, but with Mezzi and his IGL in, do you see that longer term? Is that going to actually be a stumbling block, or is this a honeymoon period we're experiencing from Fnatic? I guess that's the main question mark, really.
Yeah, I would say the part for me that is interesting about it is that I think it was Alan I was talking to about this, who said Fnatic had quite purposely tried to make sure this team didn't have any really big personalities that might clash with Mezzi or might try and make it difficult for Mezzi. This is a team generally where I think most of the players are going to be happy to work together, probably even come in with their own ideas also. I could really imagine this team not like working by committee fully, because you have to have the in-game leader who has the final say. But I feel like a lot of these guys are going to have their own ideas. Like Fasher, for example, was someone who was given quite a lot of freedom under the lineup with Bird from Sky. He was quite often the playmaker, so I assume he will come with some plays that he wants to call. It is just for me always the one question of when you're in like a really tight game, you need Mezzi to make a call. You need Mezzi to really like take charge of the team and command the team. He's never struck me as that sort of personality, and you can change your personality to a certain extent. I don't ever see him suddenly becoming this real strong leadership figure where I feel like he's going to come in with the call at the right time. Whereas you look at some of the other leaders, and that's probably something they're always going to have over Mezzi.
Yeah, it's about taking responsibility, right? And I don't think Mezzi will ever really take responsibility for a crazy call in later rounds, because I've also, from the limited sample size, because we are running off of a pretty small target time period, I do think that when they get into close games and they get into like really do or die moments, they just have a bias to being passive and playing it safe, which I think is one of the main concerns that I have for this roster, because when they go up against a better team, they will need to make a crazy play. Like somebody will have to go for something slightly different. And even just from what you're saying, where they come in with their own ideas, the fact that they've got themselves structured in pairs does actually benefit them quite heavily. Like Crims and Mezzi have built up a rapport now with the Fnatic roster, Nikados and Roy obviously working together in Copenhagen Flames. That means that even if they do want to try and do something different, they have somebody that is their sort of right-hand man or their backup player that they can facilitate those plays with, which is always a massive issue sometimes when you have big roster moves, is how is the chemistry going to work together? But even if the chemistry breaks down, those inherent pairings actually shouldn't break.
I think in terms of like, though, when we're looking at this bracket that they're in for the RMRs, I think they're still pretty comfortable top 8, right? And even with sort of recent change-ups, they've looked pretty good at EPL, right? They had a pretty impressive showing against Vitality, who are kind of looking like a number 1 contender now. They took a map off Na'Vi as well, almost made it past Liquid. So yeah, they've been putting up some pretty good performances. And Mezzi as an IGL, we're kind of in that era, right, where you need to have an IGL that can frag as well. And obviously he could definitely frag. He's been that superstar rifler before. Some teams obviously try and avoid having the fragging IGL, but it's definitely a big boon for this squad. So I think definitely a team that we want to be keeping an eye on going into the RMRs, and I think could potentially go deep at the major.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point that Emu brought up as well, just about them kind of attacking in pairs, and then building on what Hawk is saying about Fasher being the playmaker and having all of that space. That inherently leads him to kind of be on his own and kind of making that space. And we're talking about individual decision making. I think in the Pro League game, especially against NIP, I know NIP looked a little bit rough and changes have been made since then.
Let's not talk about NIP.
Yeah, all right. But like in the mid rounds, like especially on Ancient, like Mezzi was calling, like knowing when to like kind of pump the brakes, change direction. And it felt like he had a very good like overall read of that game. So I feel like he could potentially lead them to victory, especially here in these RMRs. They're going up. Their first matchup will be a best of 1 against Aurora, a team that has kind of really come out the woodwork recently, has been making strides. They made it to advanced playoffs, of course. They've been participating in lots of different European tournaments, just kind of really coming up the gate. They actually upset Astralis in one of those qualifiers. Yumi, I know that you have a little bit of information about Aurora as well. Do you want to just kind of give us like a high level overview of the team and like how it all works over there?
Well, okay, it's not really high level. First off, I asked Chiron, after he qualified, I just DM'd him and said, who are you guys? Because I obviously heard about some of the names floating around before. They're built up of some academy players. They've got as well an in-game leader that's kind of stuck around in the CIS scene with the brand Rio that you'll maybe remember from last year's RMRs, especially IEM Full. And yeah, it's just an interesting roster all in all. I'm as much as I loved Chiron for giving me information, I still find it very hard to be convinced by even what he said to me, because it does seem as though this roster has been kind of assembled out of the remnants of what Indie Ire was, because their team was going to actually break up in their, or before the last tournament they would have played on HLTV, but they played it out, they won, and then Starix approached them with this offer, just being like, hey guys, you guys trying to make a team? And they had to try and find people to fill the void, because the core was going to end up being like him, Railway, and Lackey, which Lackey will be most familiar with from the Entropic system. In fact, you might even link Entropic's downfall with Lackey leaving somewhat. So I like the team. I think it's interesting, but they played with like a lot of aggression and a lot of loose play. And I have to really see it culminate into something brand new for the RMRs, because if they go in with the qualifying play style that they have, then I actually could just see them unfortunately tanking, because they are still very inexperienced on this front. Because, I mean, you think about Fnatic, they haven't made a major in, what, 4 years? 3 years? Something along those lines? The organization, at the very least. These guys are brand new and hoping to break through, and, you know, this might be the era of new talent, but that can only go so far. I think we've established the names we're looking at in the new talent pool.
And also, beating Astralis maybe isn't like the best kudos these days, all things considered.
Yeah, everybody was beating Astralis in the qualifiers, weren't they?
Yeah.
It was actually a surprise they even made it through.
Yeah, that's true. I think to build on your point, I feel like they also need their AWPer to have impact, and the fact that they have Delusion, a player who has really only featured in VP Prodigy, that really speaks to his inexperience as well. So I feel like they're going to have a tough matchup. I feel like Fnatic will be winning that best of one to kick things off. And we kind of danced around the Astralis topic. Let's just face it head on. I mean, they nearly didn't even make it here to the RMRs and have just suffered a massive blow by losing out Config. They didn't qualify at EPL, and they've brought in Mister, who has looked good in the academy sphere, but this is one hell of a come up and a call up to really kind of state your name, stake your claim here. If I'm being honest, I don't think they make it through at all.
It's so wild, isn't it? Because I was looking at it, and I was wondering if this was going to be a hot take or not. But I was looking at it and thinking, yeah, I actually don't think they make it. Like, they just don't have the skill on this roster. You have Blame F, and now you're missing Config. And then I looked at the Mister guy briefly. So he has 149 maps on HLTV, and the longest streak of maps in a row where he's had a positive rating, he's put together with 4 maps in a row, which is basically just like one good BO3 and then a good BO1. He doesn't look like he's been doing great on the Astralis Talents team in terms of stats. I don't know. It just looks like this is so scary, because I look at a lot of the other teams, and even a team we were talking about earlier, like Aurora. Dude, if Aurora come in and play aggressive, they have skill. Like, every team here pretty much has skill. Bad News Eagles, Eternal Fire. These are all teams where I look at them and say, oh, you could actually easily just have your players go crazy and just actually carry and just beat Astralis right now with how this roster looks. This is actually really scary for them.
I was thinking about the best of ones as well, right? There's so much upset potential on these opening maps. And if you get off to a bad start and you're suddenly playing every best of 3 for your life, that can be a lot of pressure, and particularly for someone that has come through from a talent squad, right? And we talk about the Astralis talent. It's a really unfortunate timing for Astralis, obviously losing Config, but they've also completely redone their talent roster. So they've got different pool of players than they normally would have had to pull from. So Mister comes through, but they miss out on some of their top performers from the Academy League, like Fessor, Vigor, even Breezer. You know, none of these players that they normally could have called on. And so they've gone with Mister, who this does feel like maybe a bit too much of a step up. And with the format, I agree. I think it's probably a lukewarm take to say they won't make it through. I think probably a few people would agree, but it is a name that you expect to see at the major pretty much every year.
Yeah, they've got the excuse loaded up already, don't they? Like, oh well, we've missed out on config and we couldn't make it. Which it is a very valid excuse. I get it, but unfortunately, when Astralis has high expectations and they've not even been meeting them when they, whether or not they make it to the qualifiers or whether or not they perform against tier 1 teams, yeah, implementation, especially against a pool of teams that are going to be grinding hard, like especially the guys that aren't in ESL Pro League at the moment. These guys are going to be sweating to try and make sure they have every advantage possible and make sure they have as much prep as possible before they face any of these teams. And Astralis, they'll probably be trying to get Mr. up to speed, but again, there's only so much you can do with the practice and the preparation outside of actual game time.
Yeah, I feel as well, Mr. will be overloaded with information right now because Lucy's right. They've changed IGL in the Astralis talent lineup. They've now got Patty call in. And in fact, it's almost like a shared voice. So that is in a rebuild phase. He's then going to be brought into the main Astralis talent. He gets a pat on the back, going, go on, mate, go into war. That's fine. Astralis, they qualify for basically every major. It's your biggest call up to date. And you have to fill the shoes of config. Like, that is absolutely massive pressure for him. And then you've also got Astralis just in a general sense who don't really look that good. I mean, it just relies on Blame F basically being the spearhead of the entire operations when he's last alive. Or it's maybe Farley having the odd map here or there, but Farley's looked fairly inconsistent. I feel like he unfairly to him has had a lot of pressure because of rumors and also just expectation. I don't know. I can't see it either. I feel like it's a difficult one for Astralis to make that through. But I feel like we could just sit here and we could kind of go in the merry-go-round of Astralis. Yeah.
As a final aside, since the hot take isn't that they're not going to make it, I'm actually going to say I did like a little mock veto, and I think there's that website major.ieb.im or whatever. I probably messed up the URL where you can sort of draft which teams go up against other teams. And I actually do have Astralis making it through, albeit they make it through barely, but I do have them making it through. So maybe that is the hot take. Maybe the Astralis are actually just good enough.
Listen, I did one too, and I think I had them playing Eternal Fire in the 2-2 game, and I'm just like, I don't know, man. That team's got some star players on it. Also, can we just talk about why this guy who's come in? His name is Mister. It's just such a weird name, like Mister. Like, I'm almost imagining Blame F or someone coming in with a full Texas accent and going, "Sir, we're gonna have to get you up to speed, Mister. This is the big leagues now, Mister." We
in the We Play league, they were doing the team comms, and it was Mal's NXT versus Astralis Talent. Every time there was a comms round and Mal's NXT killed Mister, they were just like screaming Mister, Mister, Mister in the chat every single time, and it completely overrode the comms as well. So I mean, I don't know. It's a funny name. I feel like, look, we talked about Astralis Talent a little bit there, and a name that has moved over to a roster that is competing in the RMR is Ecstatic. Breezer moves over. They've kept Manx, but that's been a complete rebuild. It's now gone to a Danish lineup. They've actually been playing really well. They beat Mals and Ents recently to qualify for a blast spot. They look good in Challenger League for a little bit of time as well. I don't know. I feel like that roster's a bit of a, for me, a little bit of a dark horse. I feel like that they actually could potentially make it through as well. Has anyone got any thoughts on this? On the firstly, the Ecstatic lineup in general, because I feel like they've really surpassed initial expectations.
Yeah, I mean, I got to cast them quite recently for the Blast Qual, and yeah, they do look good. I think Cabby, Breezer do exactly what they need to. Queenix has some pretty solid clutch rounds. I really do want to know who's calling on this team, because it does feel.
I think.
Okay, well, it does feel somewhat reminiscent of some of the Bird from Sky elements, like some of the weird bait setups that he does on CT sides. But a lot of it does still feel raw, like they're still working out how they want to implement Breezer back in, because Breezer actually has good amounts of experience playing with the core of this Ecstatic roster from before he was on Astralis Talent. So because this was like this is basically Masonic version 2, weirdly enough. So with that in mind, there's a little bit of rapport. They are more prepared for a new squad than they otherwise would be, because of the fact that they've got history with these players. So yeah, no, I mean, kind of exciting to look at. I don't know that they make it through, but I think they're an upset team.
Yeah, they're an upset team. They're straight in the deep end. It's a bit unfortunate for them against G2. That's going to be a really tough one to kick things off, but potential for the upset there. And yeah, I mean, they've looked pretty good to where it ends, but it's the new look ends, which is also a big question mark, and I'm sure we'll probably get into ends at some point. But yeah, I don't know if that counts as much as if you beat Ents maybe 3 months ago, but definitely a team that kind of floats around the periphery of that top 8, where I kind of put them in the same park as Astralis in that way, almost in a sense, where they're kind of on the edge, where if they have a good run, they could just make through. Otherwise, they'll maybe bomb out.
I don't know if I see them making it. I just think there's a couple of other teams here which have a bit more experience or just a bit more about them. Like some of the other teams on the edge, I don't know, I guess you look at like Eternal Fire or Bad News Eagles or Fours. They just have a bit more pedigree to me. And those are the teams where I could see them causing an upset. Maybe even a Sprout. I'm not really sure where I stand on Sprout right now, actually. That's maybe an interesting one to talk about too. But I feel like there's definitely a few teams in here which you can say are solidly going to make it through. And then there is like this middle ground of teams where I'm like, I could see a couple of these causing an upset, or once you start to get towards the bottom, there's a decently wide spread of teams where I look at them and say, I think this should actually be pretty competitive for those last couple of spots making it.
Yeah, I think the best of ones is like the best chance for upsets to happen. I feel like when we do get into like the regular proceedings or the best of threes, that's where that will separate the teams where potentially it could happen to the teams that should just on paper be making it through. I feel like, yeah, Static, they are, as Lucy said, being given a really tough opener against G2. And G2, it's well, it's a little bit of an interesting little enigma with the whole Hooksy IGL debacle. They went 5-0 at Pro League, and reflecting on that, comparing and contrasting to what they performed at Blast, where it wasn't a greatest showing. The fact that Hooksy has been very inconsistent and very just missing for the most part, I feel like that still is more of a hindrance to G2 rather than just kind of offsetting that with his calls. I'm very interested to see how this develops. As the time of recording this, we haven't seen G2 play in the Pro League playoffs. I feel like, though, given all of that, with the reinforcement that they've brought in, they should, like, they've got the firepower. Like, it would be a major upset if they don't make it through.
Yeah, I don't think there's any. I wouldn't contest G2 to make it through. I think even if Hooksy doesn't kill people, they will still win. And the thing is, in Pro League, he actually has been contributing more in terms of the fragging. He has some pretty good sight holds, albeit his T side, we're maybe not so focused on that because he has good attacking players in general. So I don't think it does kind of cover up how poor he can be, because mechanically, if you watch his POV, there are certain moments where you're like, a face at level 10 player wouldn't do that. Just small mechanical blunders or weird movements on taking fights. So you can tell he's still getting comfortable in his spots, but I think he's very quickly improved considering the jump up to tier 1 and the expectations that are on his shoulders. And I think the G2 will just honestly sail through this qualifier or this RMR, no problem.
Yeah, I think the actual interesting thing that I wanted to kind of direct more towards Hawker is we've got the Hooksy pickup, obviously, but also we've got JKS. What do you think about the JKS pickup? And do you think it was the right move for him coming in? And I know it's been over basically a year, really, since he's been in like an official environment. How have you really seen him settling in? And do you think he's actually is a good pickup for G2?
I think it makes sense. It sounds like Hunter doesn't want to be doing as much of the sort of lurking roles. It sounds like he never really wanted to do too much of those, actually. He's happy to get a bit more involved. And I don't think JKS has set the world on fire on G2, but it's also just a scenario where you almost have this luxury of having such an amazing core where you have Nico, you have Monacy, then you have Hunter, who has probably been a little underrated for a while. I feel like a lot of people in the scene have been saying Hunter's really good. It's just that he maybe doesn't get the shine when you have such skilled players. So then it just becomes a scenario where you just need JKS to be a good rifler. And I don't think it's going to be a problem for him to just be a solid rifler, right? He's shown he can do it in the past. So it just kind of makes sense, I think, to round out this roster. He was available. It fills in with the roles pretty nicely. And also, yeah, just Hooksy's cooling, I think, is never going to be the problem. The problem for me is when you actually do get deep in tournaments, it's against the top tier teams where I feel like his fragging is really going to be a question mark. Because the one thing I will give Carrigan credit for in general, who's talked about as maybe someone who's also a bit of a weaker fragger, is Carrigan actually generally holds up his numbers exactly the same pretty much against top tier teams. He actually still does fine. Whereas I was looking at Hooksy's numbers, in the past, his numbers have dipped pretty heavily when going against top tier teams. But then again, now he is surrounded by better players. And I'm pretty sure he actually had a pretty fine series when G2 did beat FaZe. So maybe that's changing. It's just got to be that question of, can Hooksy hit that baseline level of fragging? Because there is that baseline. Unfortunately, it has to be talked about.
You kind of touched on it earlier, right, about the fragging IGLs, but JKS, he's going to win Australia, the first major. It's going to be great. I can't wait for it. I'm going to have a big G2 flag behind me. Obviously a bit biased towards JKS, but he's a really solid pickup. And I think the one thing we didn't touch on that's been touched a bit is the difference in Monacy, right, with Hooksy coming through. He just seems to have been unlocked. So if you look at the stat difference between at the start of the year and now, it's like a good 0.15, 0.2 rating difference in what we're seeing from Monacy. So that's a big difference and not something that people were talking about with Hooksy coming through. The big question was kind of how the rest of the players had fit in and what JKS would be doing. But Monacy has just gone to a whole nother level, and that elevates G2 completely.
Yeah, I can't believe Alexi B Montu'd Monacy. That's crazy. He made him play passive, and then he wanted to play aggressive the whole time, but management was just saying, sorry, man, can't do it.
Well, speaking of Alexi B, he touched on him. He's actually in the new NIP lineup, and I feel like some of us will have some interesting opinions on that one. You've got a few different things here, because now you're going to have Alexi B almost mantuing Rez, who Rez is now transitioning into a full-time AWP role. It was an interesting one at Pro League. I can see you be looking very happy about this. I feel like it's a big mistake. Like you've got your arguably best rifler in NIP, and now you're putting him on the sniper. For me, I don't get it. Yumi, go on, jump in. What's happening over there?
Even if you bring Alexi B in, Alexi has pretty consistently throughout all the rosters that he's joined had a slow start to get the engine up and running. So you're trying to change systems, you're trying to change your AWPer to an AWPer that hasn't been an AWPer. Like, the whole thing just smells foul. And I recoil when I think about NIP currently. Every time I look at this roster, I'm just annoyed because they have a versatile piece in Tag that was forced to AWP and is tried to learn Swedish, and now they're going back to international. Now he's not even AWPing anymore. So what was all this work in progress even for in the first place? Maybe that's also why they call it quits. Like, surely they could have tried to pull in an academy player somewhere, or a new Danish AWPer, or a Swedish AWPer, Danish AWPer. I don't care where you get this talent from, but it has to make more sense than making your trained into maybe being an AWPer, then switch back to rifling and trying to train up somebody new before the RMRs. It doesn't make sense to me.
Well, my mind just casts to Fuzi, who is doing incredibly well on Sangle, who we'll get to. But Hawker, sorry, I cut you off a little bit rudely. What's your opinion on all of this? And do you agree with what Yumi's saying?
It's also just that we were joking about Alexi B mantuing people earlier. Okay, you look at Rez as an AWPer. You look at the series, he actually did pretty well when he was AWPing. I feel like he was landing these flashy shots. He was kind of just playing this confidence play style. If you tell Rez to just hold an angle and do Mantu type things where it's like your job isn't really to be a playmaker, it feels like your job is kind of just to facilitate. I don't see Rez being the kind of AWPer who's just going to hold an angle and just consistently land a shot. I just don't see it. I don't think it even makes sense to have this in-game leader if you wanted Rez to be an AWPer. I don't think I ever see him being the player who's like, yeah, I'm going to consistently hold this angle, land this shot. I also don't think he's going to be at the point right now where he's going to be calling for plays around himself. So even if you wanted the upside of Rez's kind of crazy aim, which he definitely has, I almost feel like you might lose that because I don't think he's going to be put into as active positions as he would be with the rifle. So I just think that the Alexi B and Rez like dynamic of this team doesn't make sense. But it's also weird because for the longest time, I think this team didn't make sense and they kept exceeding my expectations. And then they have one bad event and suddenly they're like, yeah, okay, we actually do need to change. It's just a really weird situation. I probably think they still make it through just because they have good enough players. But I actually don't know now. It's actually a pretty borderline team now.
Just to jump in quickly, I do think that they are going to revert back to Esatag AWPing. I think Alexi's going to veto this whole internal affairs thing that they've done with their AWP and their rifler.
Can I provide a hot take? Because it seems like it's a hot take. I kind of like it. I kind of like the change. Rez is a very mechanical player, and I think AWPing will suit him well. But I think particularly if it gives Brolin a lot of space. He's come through as a superstar rifler, right? He was a huge talent and has come into this roster where it feels like he's sort of fighting with Rez for this space. Rez is very inconsistent. Sometimes he'll have these incredible games where he'll completely carry, and then sometimes he'll just disappear. Moving him to the AWP might be the solution. It might be able to introduce that consistency for him. And I think it does open up Brolin a bit more as well to step up in that rifle role. And then Esatag is a good support player. It's kind of what naturally suits him. And Hampus is a really good aggressive rifler. So it kind of, when I look at it on paper, I mean, it sounds crazy, but I kind of like it.
You want my hot take? Okay. You're having it anyway. Well, we get rid of Rez off the AWP. We keep Hampus doing what he's doing. I feel like again, like this is going to be a really good move for Hampus actually, because he's now omitting these IGL responsibilities and he can just focus on his crosshair, focused on what he was doing well in NIP before. I think you give Alexi B the AWP and he could be a Fallen style IGL. You've then got Rez on the rifle, you've got Brolin on the rifle. There you go. Solution.
I'm getting shades of MSL warping right here. He maybe has like one amazing tournament and then just it all just falls apart.
That take is honestly so hot that I might just get diarrhea.
I was gonna say, yeah, we were playing a game of like one-upping each other's hot takes, but I don't think we can go any hotter. I don't think it's possible. You've flown too close to the sun, Brandon.
That's fine. I'll take it. Look, there's been plenty of roster changes this entire RMR for teams that are coming in and qualified to it. One of those teams that looked really good, qualified immediately in the first RMR was Sprout, and that's a very interesting roster. Hawker, you kind of touched on it a little bit. They've brought in Refresh, who's now also transitioning to an IGL. It's Messi-esque, and he brought in Zyphon as well from Copenhagen Flames. It kind of feels like the longest strange cousin of Fnatic in that respect in terms of roster moves. Talk me through that one, Hawker. What's going on in the Sprout camp? Do you reckon they make it through? Because personally, I don't think they do.
Yeah, I don't think they do, but I think this team has a couple of really nice pieces, like Stare and Laux, I think are both just really good riflers. It is kind of weird because the narrative for me with this was when Refresh joined this Sprout lineup, I feel like everyone thought, okay, he's going to be the main man on this team. He's going to get a chance to show himself as a star again, as a really good rifler. And then, yeah, he switches to IGL. His numbers haven't been great, but they've been good enough for an in-game leader. I still think that Slacks as an AWPer is maybe a little too mediocre when compared to some of the other teams at this tournament. But I at least like that they've got a couple of good riflers. I do like Barry as the coach too. I think he's always someone who's had a pretty good mind for the game previously when he's played. It's just a team that has some nice pieces, but I don't know. I feel like it's just lacking that slight little bit extra. They should be competitive. I don't think I see them making it. I think I'm similar to you in that.
I think Zyphon is maybe the X factor there, right? Like, feels like a bit inconsistent as he started here, but he is a player that we kind of want to see really step up and frag. And yeah, like you said, Refresh, I think his IGLing has actually looked pretty good in the qualifier run. I mean, they took down Mouse, Falcons, and Tropic, Ecstatic as well, who are in this group. So they've taken down some pretty big names on the sort of debut of this roster. And for me, it's, Slacks obviously is a bit of a liability, but I think the bigger liability is whether Zyphon can step up.
The interesting thing about this team, I think, is that, well, first off, when they initially made the roster, they were banning Nuke, I think primarily just so they can make sure that the communication is nice and sound and they don't have to worry too much about like crazy up-down shenanigans on rotates. but they've also reverted to a Dust 2 ban, which is, I think, historically Heroic's first ban. So if that is the refresh influence, they might have toyed around with the idea of calling on Dust 2, thinking like, oh yeah, I could do it. But then they lost some really close games, and they were probably just like, okay, actually, I don't want to do it. If he's the in-game leader, he has to feel comfortable. I think the map pool is where I'm going to be the most concerned, because yes, Slacks has been a liability, and I think there's even rumors currently circulating around this guy. There's a Twitter German CSGO leaks where they broke the story that Refresh and Zyphon were going to join Sprout. And the problem with these accounts is that you can never hold them accountable, because if they ever get a take wrong, they usually just delete the tweet and they just, oh, look at my flawless track record. But there are rumors around whether Slacks will be removed from this roster after the RMRs. So I think for him, he's actually going to need to have a standout performance. He has to actually show that he can AWP at a high level, because he's just been so boring as an AWPer throughout his entire progression.
Yeah.
From roster to roster, he's been so boring to watch.
Yeah, it's such a good way of describing it, because I remember occasionally I'd watch a Slacks highlight play and I'd be like, oh cool, he got a 3K on Dust 2, and he's just like holding from long car, and then he's just like not getting flashed and landing shots, and I'm like, oh cool, I guess that was pretty good. Yeah,
I think one thing that will go in Sprout's favor, though, is talk about their map pool. Best of one scenarios. They play, if they are playing Nuke now, they're playing Nuke, they're playing Vertigo, they play Ancient as well. It's a little bit of a curveball team. We'll have to see if they can have the potential to try and make that one through. Just moving on a little bit as well, another team that has been doing well recently, Eternal Fire, we've touched on them. They qualified for Rotterdam. They won the close qualifier for that one spot to travel there. They qualified for Blast. They beat Liquid and we won't talk about Movistar. They beat Liquid and EPL. And since the IGL role was moved away from Voxic, he's been one of their like standout players, I think, for me personally. I mean, didn't he drop like back-to-back 30 kill maps against Liquid, if I'm not mistaken? Mm-hmm. I feel like for me, I understand why they've moved away from xCloud a little bit. I feel like they needed to give him a little bit more time personally. It's not the major pickup for me that I'm the most upset with. It's the Paz one. That's the limiting factor, I think, for this roster. Lucy, do you, just jumping in for Eternal Fire, how do you reckon they performed recently? And just as a general thing, like, do you think they can make it through the RMR?
Yeah, I mean, we've saw them put up some great results at EPL. Arguably, they didn't have the strongest group, but they still looked quite good. And yeah, you're right. It's like the Voxic and Zentari show. If those two players are playing at the level they're playing at EPL in the RMRs, then I think that they do go through. Paz needs to be doing better, though. You can't have two players that are both below 1 rating. That's just not going to get you through. So he really needs to be stepping up. And I think you're right in kind of calling out that change up to the roster. But I mean, maybe that's been what's been allowed Zentaris and Voxic to step up, because they are playing at a level we have not seen for a long time, and it makes this team really exciting.
Yeah, I will say I was actually looking at the best rated series in the Pro League groups, and out of the top 5, 2 of them were from Eternal Fire players. So Voxic's series against Liquid that you were talking about was the second highest rated series in the entire group stage. And number 1 was Brokey, who was just farming against FTW. So I don't think that really counts. And then Zantares put up a 1.7 rating in a best of 3 against Cloud9. Like, this team must be terrifying to go up against in like a best of 1 where you're up against Zantares or Voxic. That is very scary. I still get the feeling, personally, when watching this team, especially at Pro League, listen, I love Zantares. I want to see him on an international roster, because this roster, I don't think has the consistency to be able to really compete. And my God, Zantares was so damn good in that Pro League group stage. Like, his aim is just stupidly good. The one question for me going forward, actually, with this team is, I mean, this is maybe someone we'll talk about a little later, but Soulfly, who is Turkish, actually looks like a very good player. I do wonder if at some point whether he could make his way onto this roster. Like, instead of a Paz, if you looked at that, you would say, okay, this actually looks really solid now. But right now, it does kind of feel like a team where Zantares' talents are maybe a bit wasted, but they've just got enough skill where they're absolutely in the running to be able to make it through here.
It's so odd because it did just feel as though they tried everything they could to make an in-game leader work within the team that they had before, but then they just came to the assumption like, okay, we'll give it to someone who knows what they're doing. Major, we trust him, and the condition was, Paz comes with me, and they just had to take it. They just, unfortunately, if you're xCloud, you take the chop there because they want the team cohesion. But I do agree. I wish that there was a little bit more talent on this roster, and I'm glad you talk about Soulfly, because he was actually one of the players that came in to replace Emor on Songal like way long ago, when Emor was seen as this star player who still can be. You know, we have Zentaris Voxic as the proper stars, and then Emor is the maybe sometimes if I'm feeling like it. So I like that there's some diversity there, but it's a little too heavy on the bottom of the ship, unfortunately.
Just to jump in, I feel like with the Immor thing, Immor sometimes can be just very good, but when he has a bad game or a bad series, they are bad. You got here, and then you got like down here, like on the floor, like out of camera shot. Like it's a really steep fall off, and that's where I worry, because look, you've got Santares, you got Voxic, like. Can they make it through the best of ones? Yeah, like they could go through up against best of ones. But I feel like when it comes down to the true grit and determination of this team in a best of 3 environment, I don't know. I don't know whether they've got, even with the exceptional ratings, I don't know whether they are there. I feel like they are like right here, like on like a seesaw effect, like on the edge. I feel like they will go through, but I'm just saying, like, and that comes with a very like jaded, like maybe not.
I actually think they will go through, just because they're currently riding a bit of an upswing. I think they've qualified for the showdown, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And they've also just been competing well in some of their online games. Like even the days where they've had multiple best of 3s to worry about, they've still looked just as good. So I think albeit they would need a pretty good draw of how this Swiss Buchel system works. But I think they make it, but probably like a 3-2 rating or a 3-2 score at the end.
Yeah, agreed. Well, speaking of a team that was in Group D as well for Pro League, I don't think we need to spend too much time on Cloud9. I just think everyone's in the same boat. They should make it through. They're fine. They're good. They're playing well. They're currently on the 3rd map against FaZe. I don't know what the score is.
Well, spoilers.
But it comes out after the game's been played. It's 12-10 to C9, actually. So they could be potentially taken down FaZe. Are we all in agreement? I don't think we need to spend too much time on Cloud9.
Yeah, they're just a really good team. It's also just so ridiculous to me that Axile and Shiro have been like some of the highest rated players throughout the year. And it's almost weird that they haven't done a little bit more with that. But yeah, they've just got a lot of talent on this roster. Axile is probably one of the best riflers in the world, actually. So yeah, they're good to go through.
All right, no debates. Love to see it. Here's one that I think could divide the room a little bit. Bad News Eagles. Obviously had that little fairy tale run, looked like a very dark horse in the previous major. They've been kind of like up and down recently online. They're going through a little bit of a purple patch in form at the moment. I think that's because they're boot camping quite religiously together in preparation for the RMR, and they believe strongly in the team and the team cohesion. The team environment needs to be perfect, and these guys all need to be together in the same room. Obviously, that will benefit them coming towards LAN. Are we going to see the same Bad News Eagles, Yumi? Are they gonna push through the RMR, or are they one of the teams that could be left behind here?
I'm not going to pretend like I don't have a soft spot for these guys. So I actually don't think I can give you an unbiased opinion, because I really like Bad News Eagles because of how aggressive they are and just how much they don't seem to care who they're playing against. They have it does feel like they are playing a high level FPL game a lot of rounds, which is very high variance, I understand, and they probably won't make it in my analytical brain. But my heart says they do. So, rig on GXX, they have my heart, unfortunately.
Come on, be a romantic, Yumi. Go with your heart.
Yeah, I mean, I have. I put them down in my like mock pick'ems. Yeah.
Okay.
I have them.
I don't. I think again they kind of teeter on. sorry, Yumi, I'm breaking your heart straight out. I think they're similar to Eternal Fire and these sort of Sprout that kind of sit on the edge, and I think they're a really exciting team to watch. They had that really great run at the last major, but I think that's such a difficult thing to repeat again, and the results they've shown since then haven't convinced me that they can do the same magic twice. But I'd love to see it.
Yeah, the one thing with this team is if they do come in and they genuinely have just like DM'd for 10 hours a day and they just try and aim everyone, like maybe they can do it. I actually want to say the one player who I think does stand out for me on this team is Rigon. I think he's actually got a bit more to his game than just being an aimer. He seems like a pretty cerebral player. And I also think he does speak German too. So I remember in the past thinking to myself, if I was big, at some point I'd maybe consider looking at this guy, but it seems like they have actually found some other German talent, which is good. Because that was a time period where I was like, I don't know where big are going, but it seems like they figured it out now. Yeah, it's just a scenario for this team where it's like, it feels like you know their game plan. It's very one note. It's either they're going to knock you out or they're going to get knocked out type of team.
All right, then. Well, we talked about Eternal Fire. We talked about Bad News Eagles. That's actually the first matchup. Best of one. So quick fire. Lucy, who's winning that one? Best of one. Eternal Fire, Bad News Eagles.
Eternal Fire.
You mean?
Bad News Eagles.
Hawker?
I'll take Eternal Fire. Was
See,
that a major matchup as well?
Yes.
I think that was a first round major matchup, and it was like a really fun game. I think Bad News Eagles might have won it last time. That's a while ago now.
That.
Yeah, the classic surprise. We're super aggressive.
I think Bad News Eagles win that as well. So we are split. The room is split. That's nice. Nice little bit of competition between us. We'll keep tabs. We talked about Cloud9 being a very good team. They're going up against B8. B8's one of those teams that is a surprise pick to make it through even attending here. I think it's just really good for these guys to kind of have the experience of the RMR. They can play against some of these top teams that they wouldn't really have the opportunity to as well. I mean, they took down Movistar, who are going through a little really rough transition. Heat as well is a notable name. So I feel like I don't want to spend too much time on BA. I think that they're just grateful to kind of be at the RMR. I could see them maybe picking up a best of one victory if maybe results fall their way. But like, for example, I can't see them beating Cloud9.
I mean, in theory, I feel like they should be the weakest team here, and yet you list some of the wins they've got, and they actually, again, are still a competitive team, which is pretty impressive. But I would be lying to you if I knew anything about this team. I've just looked at their names, and I've heard of a couple of them, and that's all I can say. So I'm not really helpful here.
Yeah, I don't think I'm much more help. I will say that Alex, in spite of the fact that he has not so many games played, I think, competitively, he was also somebody that was ID'd by Bondik and Edward to be a part of that Ukrainian roster that never was. You know, they sort of announced that, oh, Edward's coming back into the scene, but then it kind of, the org thing, I think, fell through, and so all the players went their separate ways. So I think there might be some talent. There is certainly some talent here for B8. Also, they had 2 16-14 wins against Heat. I did just double check. I was like, I swear that was a very close game. So yeah, I mean, I'm not much help either. Could be exciting, could not. But I this is one of those teams that I'd be happy to be surprised that I undervalued in the draft, because if we have more talent coming out of the region, then you know that the CIS region has been popping off.
It kind of reminds me of like when Anonymous showed up before, and they kind of did okay, but never really made it through. That's what B8 kind of reminds me of. They're upward on a little bit of an upward trend online, and yeah, that's all I really see for them, to be honest. Lucy, got anything to add to B8?
No, there's not really too much to add, but good luck.
Yeah, for sure. So it's good we're also saying that teams won't make it through, because I feel like for a lot of these teams, you said, yeah, they potentially could, and that there is only 8 spots. One team in the CIS region is 1 win as well. I mean, we can talk about Spirit in just a second, but that's got a really exciting name on it, such as Deco, and a not such an exciting name on it, such as Flamey. So what do we make of that one, Hawker? 1 win. Are they gonna win, or are they only actually just gonna get 1 win?
Oh, good one. You know what? I actually feel like they are just going to get 1 win. I feel like that's a perfect spot for this team. I'm mostly disappointed by Lollipop on this team. I was thinking
Yes.
Lollipop's going to come in. He's just been so good on the Belarusian lineups for so long, and they just never had the skill around him. So I thought this is his opportunity. I'm pretty sure he's like a really high rated chess player as well, which I know is a weird thing to randomly say. I just remember interviewing someone on his team, I think one time, and they were like, "Oh yeah," or maybe it was just him, and he was like, "Yeah, I'm pretty good at chess actually." So I was like, "Okay, cool." It's always fun to hear when they've got other things that they're good at in their lives. But he needs to be like the second best player on this team for me, and I don't think he has been that. I will say I'm just excited to see Deco. I haven't really got a chance to properly see this guy all that much, especially against some really good competition. And from everything I'm hearing and from what I've seen, he just looks like he's one of the next players to watch out for. So yeah, I'm just hoping really that I get to see him, but I'm not really holding out hope for much of the rest of the team, sadly.
Yeah, the conversation was around Deco and Elian coming into this year, and then Elian just fell off a cliff. I don't know. I actually don't know what happened. It was even before the Lackey move, but ever since then, it's also just gotten worse, even still. So, yeah, it's kind of crazy to think. I think one win are probably my biggest pick to be a dark horse, because they do have some really solid players, and they have been grinding for quite some time. I even don't hate Flamey that much on this roster, which was a surprise to me when I first got to watch these guys. I thought I was just going to look at Flamey just sort of riding on the fact that he has all these accomplishments before and bottom fragging every game. And he does that sometimes. That is true. But he does look as though he's contributing quite meaningfully to the way they approach T-sides especially. So yeah, I do value this roster, but I do agree. Lollipop has been underwhelming considering where I think he should be versus where he actually is.
I think the Flamey point's a good one too, because he also brings the experience, right? And we talk about Deco as this kind of really exciting AWPer, but he's got no experience against top 10 opponents. And that's an entirely different kettle of fish, right? So that's why Flamey might actually be able to contribute something a bit more than just in the server. And, you know, it's easy. I've noted down in my notes, Flamey a liability ? But yeah, maybe he's actually adding more than just the 0.96 rating, whatever it is he's averaging these days. So definitely a dark horse. They also go up against Spirit in the opener, which I think they could reasonably win. I could definitely see him taking that BO1. And from there, anything's possible.
Teaching him great habits like watching Call of Duty streamers before the game's about to start.
I was going to bring that up. I think another player with like almost sleeper experience actually on that roster is Glowing, because he was part of that Cyber Legacy Trident roster with Seized and Guardian on it for a time. So maybe like he could bring over some notes, or I don't know. I hope he does well.
God, man, but Guardian, what happened? Where has he gone, man?
Taking some leave in the Sampi lineup, which is a cool story, but not for.
At least he's playing. To be fair, it's not like
exactly.
It's not like Device.
True. Well, they actually play another CIS team. They play Spirit, and I don't know. For me, this Spirit roster has got all of the right tools. It's just whether Chopper could just amalgamate them all together and make them just shine at the RMR. But I feel like with the format of the RMR, the best of ones, the best of threes, I think they've got a very good shot at making it through. Hawker, what do you think of the addition of Wonderful?
Yeah, I just think this roster's just really solid in terms of skill. Definitely Patsy has been probably the most impressive to me. I just think that guy has got a really good career ahead of him. Wonderful, like you were saying, definitely a good addition too. I am with you. The question is probably surrounding Chopper, but his in-game leading doesn't need to be great or masterful on this team, realistically. They've got so much skill that he can just do a solid job, put players in okay positions. That should be fine. It is a bit of a shame because I almost sometimes think to myself, if someone like Jerry had some of these pieces, what could happen? Could it be even better? And I don't think Chopper even brings like some really good fragging for an IGL either, which is what you'd want. With the way I feel like Chopper sets up his teams, I would want him to just be a good fragger too and just say, screw it, we're just going to be a really skilled team, which I sadly don't think he brings. But yeah, they should be good enough to make it through here.
I've actually been exceptionally underwhelmed with Spirit. Just looking at their ESL Pro League groups, you have win conditions. Magix and Patsy are supposed to be those win conditions. Magix, the last time the reason that they're able to just instantly qualify is because they had a good run at Antwerp, and a lot of that was due to the fact that Magix was having an incredible tournament. And Patsy's entry fragging is probably the second best in the region outside of maybe Yakindar in terms of how good he is at taking that opening duel. My problem is that ever since they have lost Dexter, they just look a little... There's no triple threat. Those two are the ones that, if they are neutralized in a round, I have no faith in Wonderful, Siren, and Chopper to recover a round if it comes down to it. If it comes to like a 3 versus 3 or a 3 versus 4, I actually don't have faith in these guys to perform. I know Wonderful has hit some nice shots, and people are looking at him and seeing that he has great mechanics, but I think he's just missing that extra awareness that he needs to fight in the tier 1. And I think it's just going to ultimately come down to the draft of teams they end up going up against, because I could see them losing in the first round, and I could see them having some real troubles getting going because they just don't have enough games to get everybody up to the right groove or like get themselves in the right headspace to take on all the opponents here, especially when it comes to pressure games where this roster actually has a fair amount of young players.
Yeah, they're missing that X factor that Dexter brought to the table. Wonderful's a very talented author, but Dexter is like on a whole nother level, right? And he's a big part of their prior success. And it's a fairly recent change. Like it's only been a couple of months. That's tough to adjust to with the RMRs coming up. EPL, as you mentioned, it's been pretty average. The only team they convincingly beat was NIP, which, you know, that's a whole story we've already touched on. And then Endpoint, they almost lost to, right? There was like an OT game in there. So it's not a roster that has in very recent times impressed. And with the RMRs, like literally next week after a pretty average EPL a week ago, I don't know if they've got what it takes to make it through after such a recent kind of average performance.
I got faith.
It's been probably coming up on 3 weeks now, hasn't it? Because Spirit were Group A, no?
Yeah.
Yeah, they've had that. They'll have had some time.
I feel like they've had time. Also, the fact that Dexter was a big piece of the puzzle for Spirit, and that's why he was hot property. But these guys, they're still major semi-finalists at the last major. Like I feel like they do have the tenure, they do have the experience to at least make it through. You take a look at the group, I feel like they can make it through. A team that I don't think will make it through is one that Hawker kind of touched on as well with Jerry and his pieces. Forza. I feel like they just haven't played enough officials coming into the RMR. I think like I saw a tweet from, who was it? I think it was Kenzie, and he said, it's our first official in so many weeks, and that was against Los Cogutos in the Champions of Champions tour. That one went 3 maps. They did win it, but it was a 31-29 loss on Ancient. So that's like a lot of overtimes. I mean, sure, I guess they're getting the reps in that way, but I can't, for me, Forza, like again, I'll open this one up to the floor. For me, I cannot see Forza making it through this RMR.
I don't know, man. Just the way Forza play, it's like the classic case of the best swordsman in the world isn't scared of the second best. He's scared of the guy who's never picked up the sword because you don't really know what that guy's gonna do. That's kind of the way Forza play sometimes, where I'm like, oh, okay, you've just gone for some weird aggression that I don't really understand why Jerry calls some of his rounds sometimes, but they're just really effective because they're really weird in the way they play. Is the only way I can put it. And it's also just a scenario where they always seem to come into these sorts of tournaments and do better than expected. I don't know if Jerry maybe like specifically plans for the biggest events, but you remember at the last major cycle, they did pretty damn well. Like they were actually a team that looked like they could have done some real damage, weirdly enough. So they're just a team that I feel like are always going to come in and do better than I anticipate them to. Whether or not they make it through, they're really on the edge for me. And it is partly because, like you were saying, we just haven't really seen much of them. So they're one of the teams that have the biggest range of where they could be. They could definitely come in and just not be that good, or they could come in and be that team that, yet again, comes in, you don't know fully what to expect from them, especially for a couple of these teams that maybe haven't played them before. You could get caught off guard.
Can I just slide in here? Jerry, lovely human being, fantastic interviews. Honestly, the guy is just a bundle of joy. But I think the one thing that he has to be concerned about is losing control of this roster. Because in one of the interviews I did with him, he actually said something along the lines of, he is the new guy to this team. Effectively, because the whole roster was gutted and replaced from the earlier versions of fours, he's the last remnant with this organization from what once was on the online come up. And all of these pieces have all played with each other in some capacity or have been shoulder to shoulder. They're actually all very good friends, even before joining this fours roster. So I actually, when looking at the early games, it did actually feel as though he would lose control of the mid-rounding because the group would have an idea versus what he would have an idea for. And it also sometimes just looked like they just didn't have a direction, like they couldn't decide which voice to listen to. And I'll admit, it has been some time since I've watched fours in any sort of meaningful capacity, because I didn't even know they hadn't played that many officials this year. But I was thinking just before we were going to do this podcast, thinking, when was the last time I've seen a fours game? And it's probably been about 4 or 5 months since I've seen a proper fours game. So they might have sorted this problem out. Maybe him and the coach have come to an agreement, or maybe the players have come to an agreement, because he has a lot of respect within the scene. But it can be hard to fight off instinct when your caller is trying to make a decision based off of his instinct as well. You're going to have a conflict there just inherently. Those extra few seconds, whether it's you're maybe not even as that invested in the decision, that can make a difference. And it felt like it did for fours for a lot of their officials.
They also don't have a great head-to-head against a few of the teams that they're coming into this. They've had losses against, one win. They've had losses against Eternal Fire very recently. They've had a couple of wins here and there against like BNE, so there is the potential. But yeah, the lack of officials and time in the server, they're an outside chance to make it through, but a further outside chance than some of the other outside chances.
Yeah, there's one team, before we kind of just quickly like recap and we kind of give a verdict. We'll go down the list and I'll say, are they making it? Are they not? Gamer Legion, we haven't really talked about those guys. They've gone through a massive change up in their roster as well. They've brought in Acor from Mouse Sports. They've brought in Shane as well from that roster from NXT. Shuey, actually, not Shane. But regardless, they brought in a Mouse NXT player. They brought in a guy from the main roster who was benched, and they brought in Kios from Falcons. That's gone for a major transition. Lucy, you're a big Mouse Sports fan. What do you think about kind of the additions to Gamer Legion?
Yeah, I mean, good on Acor. Finding his way to a second RMR. Completely drops off the radar after IEM Winter last year when he's dropped from Mouse. Doesn't play really anything on Digital TV, and then just appears for the RMRs and qualifiers. So good on him. It's difficult for me to see this team making it through. That I don't know if they'll even win a game. They lost to Bench Heroes in the seeding, so I don't have high expectations. And a bit sad Bench Heroes won't be here, but that's a story we'll get into later. But yeah, it's difficult for me to see it. There's potential, but the storyline is just not there.
This is a weird one, because I don't understand how this team hasn't played an official since those qualifiers. I don't get it, because they basically put together, it almost felt like a mix for those qualifiers, to be honest. I don't think they played together at all before that point. And then they go through, they make it through the qualifiers, good job. And now I actually don't even know, I assume they've just been practicing together the whole time, but I literally have no clue what to expect. Because I was watching those qualifiers and it didn't really feel like they were a proper team yet. It really felt like they were just coming into it and doing whatever they could with the pieces they had. I do think, from what I've heard, it sounds like Shuhi's a pretty good in-game leader. I'm hoping he's the sort of in-game leader Acor can work under, because I actually do believe Acor can be a good AWPer. I think it just didn't make sense with Dexter. Dexter's just, I think, too loose of a caller. Acor works really well in structured teams for me. I actually think if you just put him in positions and tell him to sort of figure it out and make it easy for him to not have to make decisions, for example, I actually think he can be good. I also think IM is a kind of player who can just occasionally carry a map. and is really skilled. So there are some positives to this team, but yeah, it's just so uncertain with what level of practice they're coming in with. I feel like they'll probably get at least one win, but it's hard to imagine them making it through just because I have no track record to go off of.
I think it's pronounced Im or Im.
Is it Im? Bro, I hate his name so much. Every
know,
time I look at it, I'm like,
because I've been messaged before being like, hey man, look, you just need to, I think the pronunciation's wrong and you'd appreciate it. Yeah, I think it is
Imma. Oh, I've heard that before, yeah. I should have remembered.
But I remember when this team made it through, I was very confused about why a MOUZ NXT player was going to be allowed to participate in the same tournament that MOUZ themselves were going to take part in. Because I think if you're MOUZ NXT, you do want to keep a good in-game leader. In-game leaders are very, very sought after at the moment, and he's one that was under the academy system. But based on what I've seen from the rosters in and outs of MOUZ NXT, I almost feel like the contracts were running up or running out, and they had already known that they weren't getting the extension. There was also the season where MOUZ didn't win the Academy League, so how much of that factors into it? But he was released. He's the caller on this team. I actually just have a lot of faith in Ash to work with Shui to make sure that they actually get themselves up to speed in time. I've always thought that A-Core was better than what he has shown, just simply because I think he was brought into MOUZ initially under false pretenses, actually. So I like this roster. They are probably my roster to be the upset team. I would not be surprised if they make it through and cause upsets in this bracket, and I think they would beat somebody like a Spirit if it came down to a deciding spot.
Yeah, they're my potential like upset team. I think if any of them can do it, and out of the upset teams, so to say, it would be Gamer Legion. A-Core performed very well during those open qualifiers as well.
He also, worth noting, like his best performance under MOUZ was at the major, right, in Stockholm. So he can perform under pressure. That was when he stepped up. I guess when he knew his life was on the line and he was getting dropped, he was able to really perform. So he's used to performing in these sort of conditions. So yeah, maybe that'll be the difference.
All right. So we've touched on all of these teams in quite a bit of depth. I'm just gonna go down and just name the teams at the RMR, and then I guess we've got to pick 8 of them to go through. I know it's going to be a little bit difficult. We're not going to agree on all of them, but just a little bit of like a rough prediction. So I think we're all in agreement, like for starters, FaZe, they're going to make it through the RMR. Don't have to dwell on that one. Astralis, for me, no, they don't make it. Hawker, what are you saying?
Oh, yeah, I think I have to say no. Oh, it feels so weird. It feels so wrong, but I'm saying no.
Lucy?
I think that the experience they have with Glaive calling, if Flame can continue his form, I'm gonna say yes.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with yes here, actually.
Okay, well, we're screwed now.
We're split.
What do we do now?
No, it's fine.
We'll figure it out later.
We'll come back.
Well, look, it's fine. It's not just a hard and fast rule. We're just gonna go through all the teams. So look, we're split on the room on Astralis. My producer that's recording this says no, Astralis aren't making it through. So technically, we've got a majority.
Scales tip.
There we go.
So we're gonna say no. All right. G2. Everyone, yes.
Yeah.
All right. So we've got 2 teams that are making it through. Cloud9, yes.
Yeah.
NIP.
Yes.
Hawker, kick us off.
Yes.
All right. Lucy, yes.
Yes.
Yumi?
I'm a no. Sorry.
I'm also a no.
Oh,
but the producers and NIP fans, he's going to say yes. There it is. Ha 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 ha. Yeah. So, okay, so we've got FaZe, G2, Cloud9, NIP. We've got 4 already, guys. All right. Spirit.
No.
I'm also no.
Yes.
I'm actually so clueless on this one. This is so close for me.
You want to? Should we put them in the maybe? We can have like a maybe.
Okay, I mean, we can put them in the maybe for now. I feel like I'm just
right?
delaying all the decisions in my life until later. You know,
It's
just like
Eternal Fire.
Yes.
Yes.
I
say yes. I can't believe we're unanimously
that's the unanimous one somehow.
Okay, it's going to get a bit difficult now because we've got 3 teams left, okay? The next one, Fnatic.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
All right, we've got 2 spots left. Sprout.
I think close, but no. Close, though.
Forza. Walker's gonna say yes.
I want to say yes. I'm gonna say yes. My boy Jerry.
I had Sprout as a yes, but Forza no, man. I can't.
Should we add them into the maybe?
I'm gonna put him as no.
Why
Bad
can't
News
we all
Eagles.
just take part?
I gotta
We
say
all
no
can.
on Bad News Eagles.
I have Bad News Eagles, yes.
Yeah,
I
but
don't
that's
think
your
they can
heart.
repeat it.
Yeah. what can you do?
I'm saying no. Sorry, the majority. I'm sorry, Yumi. Bad News Eagles ain't making it.
That's
One
unlucky.
win, no.
No.
Aurora,
No.
And one of the
Actually-
teams that weirdly probably could do it, but I have to say no.
Aurora for me, I had them in my little predictor thing as going through.
They got a
we'll
rough
see.
draw, man.
That's true. Look, so we'll say no to Aurora then. Ecstatic,
No.
no.
I'm saying no.
All right. Gamer Legion.
I know what you want to put them through, Brad. I'm looking
I
at
know,
you.
I
You're trying
want
to.
to
You're
put
trying
them
to.
through,
You're
yeah.
trying to
I've
convince
already
me.
made my choices. Like in
have
my
to say
heart, I
no.
can't even justify it.
That's fine. I'll leave them off. So that means that we've got Sprout and Forza as maybes and Spirit. So 2 of these can go through, if I'm not mistaken. I don't. My maths is okay sometimes. I think we've got 2 spots left. So
The more I'm thinking, like, oh man, I don't know if I want to say that. Do Astralis maybe make it? I just have no faith in that roster, though. I have no faith.
Neither do I. They haven't
I mean-
got config. For me, they haven't got config.
Yeah,
They're
they
not gonna go
can't, they
through.
can't.
They
They're-
can't.
Yeah.
No other team has config either.
True.
What kind of logic is that? He's not playing. He's not off tune. To be fair.
Ugh.
All right. And
Do we wanna-
B8, no, by the way. Yeah. no.
Yeah, B8's a
Alright.
no.
Yeah.
No.
All right.
Like you
Alright.
said, happy to be there.
Yeah. So I think. Well, yeah, we got 2 left. Okay, so we got 2 left out of Spirit, Forza, Sprout.
I think Spirit make it through. I feel like if
I
they're
think they do.
cracking hard coming
if
into
they're
this,
out of
they
these
should make
3,
it.
Out of these 3, I think they go through. All right.
Yeah.
So now we have to decide between Sprout and Forza. And I'll be honest, I think it might be Forza.
Ooh, I go Sprout in this.
Yeah, I would go Sprout as well.
Let me
I've seen
think
too
for a
much
sec.
chaos on 4s to be convinced. Like at least I know
Chaos is a
Sprout is a
ladder,
new.
Yumi.
I
Chaos is a
know.
ladder. Yeah, I think I am saying 4s. Yeah, I'm saying 4s. I really don't know though. This is really close.
I'm
for me.
changing my mind. I'm changing my mind. It's going to have to be Sprout because Forza haven't played many officials. That's.
I feel like
That's
that might
me.
help them. I'm not gonna
What?
lie.
How?
It's gonna help them.
There's
No
less
one knows what
tape,
to expect.
Exactly,
No
yeah.
one knows what to expect anyway. That doesn't help anyone.
Nobody knows what to expect from Gamer Legion, but you're not making that argument for them.
No, I got ruled out
Alright.
of Game of Legion. All right, so look, we've picked 8. Okay, but that does conclude our little RMR roundup. But thank you all for being here. Has anyone got any closing remarks before we call it quits? We turn the mics off.
NAP, get your shit together, please.
True.
NIP, prove the haters wrong.
All right, NOP, good luck. I don't know. I can't see it happening. Put Alexi B on the AWP. There we go.
Oh my.
All right, we'll see you all next time. Thank you. Have a good one.